Wait, YouTube. Oh, did I not go? Yeah. Okay. Is it just going live on YouTube? Okay. So I don't know what happened there on YouTube, but for some reason, okay. So I think it's supposed to be going live now. And let's see what happened here. Okay. So it claims that it's going live. So, all right. Now on YouTube, they're able to see the stream and that, all right, so we're doing, those of you on YouTube, sorry about that. For some reason, I thought it was going live on YouTube and the stream didn't cut, but now the stream's there. We're all good. Okay, so going from there, Khrushchev, all right, so Khrushchev takes over after Stalin. And one of the things to note about Khrushchev is his quote unquote secret speech, which I think was intended to be secret, but then it was leaked out to the West, okay? And then it got, it got out there. So it was leaked to the West and all of that, from there. And so, basically what Khrushchev did in his secret speech is he condemned Stalin's cult of personality. Because one thing to note here, Stalin builds this totalitarian state, but the whole idea of, Karl Marx, when he came up with the theories of Marxism, wasn't thinking about what the Soviet Union became. That was actually, from Marxist theories, this was supposed to result in a greater amount of, freedom and stuff for people. Now, of course, we see how that worked out. But the idea, Khrushchev says Stalin became a cult of personality and we need to get away from that. Now, although Khrushchev is trying to, like the age of the gulags, and this sort of the purges and all of that, that's going to kind of lessen. Now, let's note here that, certainly Khrushchev was not going to be an advocate of liberalism or anything like that. Khrushchev made it a priority as far as production. Stalin, industrial production. Okay, Stalin basically takes, Russia and says we've got to become an industrial power. Okay, especially after getting whipped like that in World War I by Germany. That by the time we get into World War II, Russia has gotten on par with Germany. Now, granted, Russia's got a much bigger population. It's kind of like when we say that, China and the United States have a similar GDP, but China has, at least 4 times as many people. And so, but the thing is that Stalin had focused on industrializing. So, he had that first 5-year plan, which was actually met its targets a year early. Now, later 5-year plans weren't so good, okay, because command economies, they can work for a while. If you're way behind, somebody comes in and says, hey, everybody else is industrialized, we need to do that. And so then, though, Khrushchev is still trying to do the planned economy, and he wants to focus on consumer goods, basically that they're, household goods that make housework easier, because this is something where in the Soviet Union, it was generally expected that everybody was working outside the home. So, for a woman to go work outside the home and then she comes home and she has to do housework and she doesn't have the benefit of modern appliances. So Khrushchev, that was one of his things. And also with Khrushchev, the whole idea of quote unquote peaceful coexistence with the West. Okay, so Khrushchev, this is kind of during that sort of detente period where we start to see kind of a thawing out of relations between, the Soviet Union and, the United States, Western democracies, and that sort of thing. So going from there, Khrushchev doesn't last very long, but Brezhnev comes in after him. Okay, so with Khrushchev, the peaceful coexistence, the cult of personality, the criticism of Stalin, and then of course the focus on consumer goods. Now Brezhnev, when we look at Brezhnev, what we're looking at is, first of all, economic stagnation in the 1970s, but it's not like the West was doing great in the 1970s either. So we just want to note here that, that things weren't going so well for the Soviets economically in the 70s. But again, the 70s were kind of just, in the global economy as a whole, kind of economic stagnation sort of period. But the biggest thing for Brezhnev is the Brezhnev doctrine. Okay, so we want to think about, the Warsaw Pact. All right, so when we look at the Warsaw Pact, what we're seeing there is this was basically kind of a reverse NATO sort of thing, if you will. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Making sure that let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. All right, so let's just go ahead and go into like NATO and the Warsaw Pact. Okay, so on one end, let's see. So NATO during the Cold War. Now, of course, Greece and Turkey are brought in pretty early, but the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, let me show you something. I've got this little thing, one of my tutoring clients and I were working on this. I'm kind of proud of it, okay? NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now, watch this. North Atlantic Treaty Organization, okay? Do it with me. North Atlantic, like water, you see, treaty, we're signing, organization. We make a little O and it's kind of like an organization. Okay. You kind of have like three, we got an organization. We got people kind of getting together. So North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So as far as that goes, that, when we're looking at something like this, we see the NATO countries. So you've got Norway, the UK, Denmark, West Germany, of course, because, during the Cold War, you've got the partition of Germany. And of course, the British, the French, and the United States in their combined zone, that becomes West Germany. Another thing we want to note is your course and exam description mentions specifically the German economic miracle. Okay, so the German economic miracle that happens in this time. Now, there's actually a German word for it, the Wirtschaftswunder. I don't know what okay, I'm not going to pretend to be able to say that. But basically this miracle that Germany had been completely destroyed in World War II. And so this economic miracle that happens, and of course, this was something I think the Times, the British one, right? So the Times, which is saying, and you look at this here, that basically, West Germany, it's like the Volkswagen Beetle, and this is basically like, a West German car that's super efficient and inexpensive. And, we see a million cars of the Volkswagen Beetle. But again, here's Germany in 1945. I mean, the thing is, we don't talk about this a whole lot, probably not as much as we should, but the British and the Americans, basically, they started this campaign during World War II of area bombing, or sometimes called carpet bombing, because it's like you're putting bombs, over these cities, almost like you're laying carpet. And not just industrial targets, okay, not just military targets, but civilian neighborhoods. Okay, so when we look at this, that we see that, just this extreme devastation. There's the German city of Saxony. I mean, just bombed to nothing. And so you see here that we have, of course, the Marshall Plan, or the European Recovery Plan, okay? The European Recovery Plan, or Marshall Plan, that's basically dedicated to rebuilding Europe, and especially Western Europe. Now, the United States, this is one of the things about, looking at the Cold War in perspective for European history, that this is a time where the United States becomes a central player, a central character. You think about today with the Russia-Ukraine war a couple weeks ago. I guess it was last month sometime, perhaps a month or two ago, maybe. Sometimes things get a little blurry for me this time of year. But, President Biden went all the way to Ukraine, to show his support. And that's something where you see that the United States has gotten a lot more involved in European affairs since 1945. So the Marshall Plan is basically, all of this aid is dealt out to European countries. And now the United States has kind of learned from the World War I experience that, what they're going to do here is they're going to not give loans or anything like that, but they're going to, the United States is just going to give foreign aid, named for George C. Marshall. And you see, they wanted people to know when Marshall Plan aid, isn't that a very American thing to do? That we just say, look, we want everybody to know this is not an anonymous gift. Western Europe, we want you to know where your bread is buttered. And we are going to be very generous with you. But of course, the price of our generosity is you not turning to communism. Okay. So you can see that we are going to Scandinavia, we're going to Western Europe. Spain's a little isolated with the Franco dictatorship. But the Eastern Bloc, the Soviet Union, all of that, no Marshall Plan money for you. But, France and Italy, these were two countries where there was a legitimate fear that they were actually going to willfully elect a communist government in some of these countries. And of course, Britain scared some people as well that in the 1945 elections, the UK 1945 general election, this is a time where basically the Labor Party wins in a landslide. They're like, Churchill, thanks, but you can go home now, kind of thing. Like, so the Labor Party gets a huge, when we look here, that they just trounce the Conservative Party. And this is the first time that the Labor Party, and it is a decisive majority. And so this is something that there's some fear in the West as well. I mean, is Britain going in a, very leftward direction? And so the Marshall Plan money, now, of course, we see that the Labor Party has gotten, much more mainstream than it was when it was initially founded. So as far as that goes, we see that the Marshall Plan cements this relationship between the United States and Western Europe. Now, also, if we look at the so-called Eastern Bloc, okay, so we look at the Eastern Bloc. This is basically where Stalin, after World War II, Stalin wants this sphere of influence, okay, where he actually expands the Soviet Union a little bit. And then now Poland, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, these are not members of the Soviet Union, but they are going to the Soviet Union's going to set up puppet governments there. And of course, in East Germany. Now, remember that Berlin is in East Germany. So Berlin is, West Berlin is going to be occupied by, Britain and the United States and France. So with that, as far as Brezhnev, one thing we want to note is the Brezhnev doctrine, okay? We want to note the Brezhnev doctrine, that this is something that there have been a couple of attempts. Now, Stalin told, Churchill and, FDR that the end of World War II, he needed a sphere of influence, all right? Now, what Stalin never quite said plainly, which I guess you could have thought that. I mean, it's just, are you really going to trust this guy? But Stalin never really clarified that what he meant by a sphere of influence was to have like full and total control over these countries and their governments and not allow them self-determination. So, when we're thinking about the Brezhnev doctrine, what's going to happen is the Hungarian revolt, okay, or the Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Now, revolution, it's kind of like the revolutions of 1848. Sometimes revolution can be a little bit misleading because, like the revolutions of 1848, this is something that was put down on this Hungarian Revolution of 1956. Now, what you see here, okay, probably more appropriately, the Hungarian uprising, because the result here was a Soviet victory, okay? So this was really an attempted revolution. But note here this flag of the Hungarian revolutionaries and the flag of Hungary, okay? So the Hungarian People's Republic. Now, the flag from 1957, here's something to kind of look at here. One thing you'll notice in this Hungarian uprising, you see where here is the flag of Hungary. And what the Hungarians would do is they would cut this Soviet symbolism out of their national flag. Okay, so this is a nationalist uprising. Let's just take a quick look at the flag of Hungary. I want to get one of these for my classroom. I think I just have to get a Hungarian flag and just, cut this hole in it. But what happened here is when we look at the flag of Hungary, this is Hungary's flag. They've got this tricolor flag that we see in a lot of European countries. And so when the Soviets took over and they established a communist government, we see that the Hungarian People's Republic, you've got the hammer, the red star for socialism, you got the grain and all of that. And so what the Hungarians would do is they would just cut it out. So this was, this was where they say, look, we're going to cut out this communist coat of arms, and this was their flag for their revolt. And of course, what you see here is from 1957. Even though the Soviets sent in tanks and they reestablished, Soviet control there, we see that the Hungarians, at the very least, got their flag back. So the Warsaw Pact was basically the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc here, that in the response to NATO being formed, then the Warsaw Pact was formed. Now, NATO is a mutual defense pact, okay? And so basically this strategy of containment is the NATO countries, they are saying that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. So an attack on Greece is an attack on France. It's an attack on Canada and the United States and Britain. An attack on Turkey is an attack on Italy and Portugal, and of course the United States, which is basically providing a lot of the military support during this time. And so, the Warsaw Pact, that's what we see, these countries that are aligned with the Soviet Union. And so then there was the Prague Spring, okay? There was the Prague Spring, and the Prague Spring is basically in 1968. You've got, now, I don't think you'll necessarily remember this guy, but this guy is at Dubček. I don't know. It's a written test, but I don't typically remember his name. But the people of Czechoslovakia, they elected someone who was something of a reformer and a liberalizer. And what he said about his program, he called it socialism with a human face. Okay. And so basically he's trying to steer Czechoslovakia more in a social democracy kind of direction, and something where you can still have socialism, but allow people free expression, the freedom to publish, and all of that. Okay. So going from there, the Prague Spring, like basically they start relaxing censorship and all of that. But then we see here, they carry their national flag past a burning Soviet tank. So this was an uprising in Czechoslovakia. Now, of course, it was put down. Okay, the Soviets ended up putting it down, but they never really forgot about this. There was this guy, Jan Palach, okay, which Jan Palach, like there were people who protested after Soviet rule was reestablished. This college student here, just 20-year-old Jan Palach, he decided, now self-immolation, that is lighting yourself on fire. Okay. And basically, he committed suicide by lighting himself on fire in a public space. And he wanted to call attention to, what he thought, that the people of Czechoslovakia were just, they were just going to tolerate the Soviet reassertion of, the Soviet reassertion of power. And, he said, like, look, I mean, I would rather just die than live unfree in my country that's dominated by the Soviet Union. Now, this happened in January of 1969. Now, this ends up becoming a big deal. Now, how does this all connect with the Brezhnev Doctrine? Okay, so the Brezhnev Doctrine, while NATO says any country that attacks us, that's an attack on us all. What Brezhnev says in the Brezhnev Doctrine, after he puts down, the Soviets had put down the Hungarian revolt. or the Hungarian uprising. They had put down, this Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia. And Brezhnev puts out this doctrine that says if there is any socialist country that is trending toward capitalism, in other words, letting people have free expression and that sort of thing, okay? If there's any kind of, trend toward capitalism, then, that's going to be a concern of all socialist countries, okay? So that's going to be a concern of all socialist countries if one of those socialist countries is trending toward capitalism. And so as far as that goes, then, basically he says that that is going to result in a full-scale invasion from the Soviet Union. So Gorbachev, okay, so when we look at, Mikhail Gorbachev, okay, and he is taking over as the leader of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, okay? So as far as that goes, he becomes the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1985. Now, by the time he becomes the general secretary, okay, as far as that goes, he is taking over as general secretary, and he becomes convinced that, like, look, this thing is about to fall. Like, the Soviet Union is on its last legs. And so we want to note here that with Gorbachev, it's not that he was a liberal, okay, but he believed that unless you inject a bit of liberalism into this, then that is going to be something that is going to be, it's not going to be sustainable. So first of all, he renounces the Brezhnev doctrine, and that will result, of course, in the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia. Now, we'll note here, as far as that goes, that is 20 years after Jan Palach burned himself to death. And so the Velvet Revolution, now velvet, because velvet is very gentle, okay? Velvet is very gentle, unlike me, okay? But velvet is something that, you just kind of like, you just almost like petting an animal or something like that, right? And so the Velvet or Gentle Revolution. Now, it looks like the Czechs have their way of calling it, and the Slovaks have their way of calling it, but basically they have a non-violent transition of power. So these revolutions of 1989, of course, this is one of those, the Berlin Wall is going to be the most iconic as far as that goes, because you've actually got a wall there. And just shortly before, Ronald Reagan had said, tear down this wall, and then there they are tearing it down. So as far as that goes, those are those revolutions of 1989, the fall of communism in the Eastern Bloc. So Gorbachev, though, in order to try to fix the Soviet system, the reforms there are glasnost, okay, glasnost, which was openness, okay? Glasnost means that we're going to have openness and transparency. Now, the way I remember glasnost is glasnost, okay? So as far as that goes, glasnost, like you can see through it. And perestroika, you see structure in stroika, okay? So glasnost, openness and transparency, and also the government's going to be more open about what it's doing, and it's going to allow criticism. Now, also, you've got the perestroika, all right? So anti-alcohol campaign in Russia. Good luck with that. All right. Now, okay, that was like from 1914 to 25. Okay. But as far as that goes, you've got perestroika, which is basically a movement to reform. And you don't necessarily have to know all of the details of glasnost and perestroika, but note that glasnost means openness, and perestroika is something that is basically reforming or restructuring and trying to help the Soviet Union to get, but again, structure, Stroika, you can remember that, okay? So going from there, that basically at that point, the Soviet Union's already teetering on its last legs and pretty much, pretty much is gone from there, okay? So going from there, let's go ahead and, okay, the welfare state. Okay, so let's go ahead. That is a great idea to talk about that. Okay, because now to go back to the idea of a welfare state, we have to go back to Otto von Bismarck. Okay, that Otto von Bismarck, basically is dealing with the Social Democratic Party, that is a bunch of like Marxist and socialist at the time. And Bismarck wants to make sure that Germany does not become a socialist country. But he then says, you know what, I'm going to have to actually institute some reforms to basically shut these people up. And so what he does is Bismarck actually introduces the first limited welfare state in Europe in the late 1800s in Prussia, Germany. So Bismarck, old age pensions. Okay, basically there will be a small payment from the government when to people who are of an age where they can no longer work. There will be government sponsored accident insurance. Okay, so there will be, if you get in an accident, kind of like what we call today workman's comp. Okay, so a welfare state, we want to note that there are a lot of things about the welfare state. As far as we have a welfare state in the United States, it's like a lot of times in the United States, when we hear welfare, it conjures up an image of just basically paying someone who's capable of working not to work. Okay, that is, I think, one thing that kind of comes up in the United States where, you see welfare, the government's giving somebody a check who's not working, we call it welfare. But as far as that, when we think about Social Security, Medicare, those things are part of the welfare state. Unemployment, okay, that if you are suddenly laid off from your job and you're actively looking for another job, you can draw unemployment. So a lot of this, now in Britain, typically, European countries are going to have a more generous welfare state than the United States. Now, part of that is they don't have to spend as much on their military because they're getting defended by the United States thanks to NATO. But after World War II, for example, the Labour Party, okay, takes over in Britain, and the Labour Party creates the National Health Service. So the NHS, or National Health Service, it basically is what people would call in America socialized medicine, that the government took over the entire medical industry. So any kind of necessary medical procedure, doctor's visit, that sort of thing, that is going to be covered by the National Health Service. Now, remember one of the fundamental principles in economics: there's no such thing as a free lunch, okay? That the National Health Service isn't free. People pay taxes to support it. And in Britain, they tend to, the National Health Service tends to be pretty popular. Now, that is not universal. Like in the Netherlands, for example, they have a universal health insurance, something that is, like the government doesn't operate the healthcare system, but the government, basically mandate, there's an individual mandate to buy health insurance. And if you don't have enough money to do that, the government will assist you in purchasing your own health insurance. So basically in the Netherlands, the Netherlands, that their healthcare is a little bit more expensive. I think they spend a little bit more on their healthcare, but at the same time, I think the Dutch are some of the happiest with their healthcare system because it is the government makes sure everybody's insured, but it is private providers who actually provide the service. So I would say the Dutch system is a bit closer to the system that we have in the United States, but in a way that I guess guarantees a few more people that they're going to get health care. So with that, when we think about the welfare state, it is something that is, kind of a cradle to grave. Another thing that, Britain, for example, has paid maternity leave, and I think maybe paternity leave as well. So in the United States, for example, where people are expected to be, generally expected to be a bit more self-reliant, if you are on maternity leave, you have saved some vacation days or something like that. But again, in a lot of European countries, they have maternity leave. So, how long is maternity leave in France? Okay, so if we were to look there, that French mothers can receive up to 26 weeks of maternity leave. They're granted a minimum of 16 weeks of parental leave. So when you think about the government, giving some sort of maternity or paternity leave or something like that, but as far as that, historically only available to expected mothers, now guarantee leave, parental leave to mothers, fathers, adoptive parents. So these are some things, but again, Europe has had to, a lot of these European countries have had to kind of curb their welfare states a little bit because, when you have these welfare states, especially as the countries age, France, for example, has had, you've seen those riots. Hopefully you follow a little bit of European like current events, but France, like Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has actually like kind of unilaterally through some kind of constitutional maneuver raised the French retirement age from 62 to 64, which I think is pretty sound policy. I can't find another country, like another developed country, that will give somebody a state-sponsored retirement old age pension at 62. In the United States, full retirement age now is 67. If you want to draw full Social Security, then you start drawing Social Security at 67. And again, when we talk about a welfare state, this isn't like, you can retire anytime you want. If you have saved, if you've been, been lucky or industrious or something like that, then you are in a situation where you are able to you're able to retire early because you saved and you invested well or something like that. But when we talk about the welfare state, that means that the government is going to take care of people that need it. Okay. So, and also I think, when you think about things, you could even call, the public school system and things like that. Those are things that are basically provided by the government rather than somebody having to do it for themselves. So with that, let's go ahead and see what we've got here. Now, continuities and changes from Lenin to Stalin. When we think about Stalinism, okay, a few things about Stalinism. First of all, socialism in one country, okay? Stalin says that, we are going to have socialism in one country. And that means that the Soviet Union is basically not going to try to bring about worldwide communist revolution. And in fact, even in Lenin's time, Lenin is trying to draw foreign investment into the Soviet Union. And so the socialism in one country, this is something that kind of opens up, Russia to being recognized by other countries, diplomatic recognition and that sort of thing. So, basically, let's try to focus on building socialism in this one country. Also, when we mention industrialization, that's a big part of Stalinism. Now, another thing is that Stalin rescinded Lenin's NEP, okay? So Lenin's new economic policy. Now, Lenin's new economic policy, once the Russian Civil War was over, the economy is on the verge of collapse. And Lenin says, well, maybe Russia wasn't quite ready for pure communism. Okay. So Lenin says, and, because Karl Marx wouldn't have picked Russia as the most likely place that would experience a communist revolution. Marx would have said it would have happened in somewhere like Britain or Germany or something like that. So when we're looking at, at Lenin with the NEP, he says that the state will control large enterprises, okay? But basically, he's going to allow petty capitalism, okay? So as far as, I've got an online tutoring company, for example. And so that is an example of petty capitalism, somebody who owns a business that, they're just, it's something that is either a side hustle or maybe it's how they support their family. I've got a little bit of, maybe some of y'all watch the ads when y'all are watching, videos to prepare for this exam. And, you got that YouTube, maybe a little bit of that YouTube revenue. The NEP doesn't care about that. But when it comes to like larger corporations and the financial sector and all that, those things will be controlled by the state. Okay. But Lenin says he's going to turn, the NEP is basically about Lenin turning a blind eye again to petty capitalism. That's like, middle class capitalism, not somebody that owns like, big, large corporation that's going to be seized by the government and owned and operated by the state. But petty capitalism. Now, Stalin, he says, we're going to get rid of the NEP. There will be no more capitalism of any sort. We're going to collectivize agriculture as well. Now, that is where you've got the terror famines and that sort of thing as well. And of course, the Stalinist purges. So the biggest thing when we think about Stalinism, socialism in one country, then you've got the pushes for industrialization, and then, of course, the recension of the NEP. And if you're not on board with Stalin, he's just going to, he's just going to starve you to death or kill you or send you to the gulag or something like that. And so as far as that goes, one thing I would note, Tori, that one of the cultural effects of the Cold War is certainly that the United States is not just sending this Marshall Plan aid, but also, especially in France, there is a lot of concern with the spread of American culture, things like, wearing blue jeans and stuff like that, which really wasn't a French kind of thing, before that. So there is, when you look at, like Charles de Gaulle, for example, when he vetoed Britain coming into the European Economic Community, which was the economic predecessor of the European Union, Charles de Gaulle said, well, you know what, Britain coming into the European Economic Community is basically going to be a Trojan horse for the United States to come into the European Economic Community. So that's what, what he said, what he's thinking there. So one of the things I would say that there is a lot of cultural exchange between Western Europe and the United States. Now, in the East, one thing that you see there is, of course, the repression. And one thing that, that I've, been told about, and I think that kind of holds up a lot of times, that, when you go into Eastern European countries, strangers are less likely to smile at you. Like a lot of times, in former Soviet countries and Soviet dominated countries, there is the person's public persona that is more serious, and then that person's private persona, which is more like, jolly and such, so especially if you have like friends who are Russian or some other like type of Eastern European, a lot of times there's just something about their culture that they get in their familiar circle. They are much more jovial and they, they smile a lot more. But when you are, when they're out and about, they just kind of learn to keep their head down and not, draw a lot of attention to themselves when they're in public. And one other thing that I think is kind of cool is the Radio Free Europe, that there were broadcasts like Radio Free Europe, that NATO, the United States and the NATO allies would actually send radio broadcast into these Eastern European countries that they could, they could tune in and, listen to Radio Free Europe. And that was something that, where they could feel like they were connected because they can't leave their country. Now, also before the Cold War, Eastern Europe was already less developed, less industrialized, poorer than Western Europe. And so, basically, when you look at the Cold War era, that is something that pretty much doubles down on that. And another thing is that East Germany, like the former East Germany, has still not caught up economically with West Germany. So, when you look at, so Germany per capita, GDP by state. Okay, so and again, the Germans, like the United States, they have states. Okay, so if we're looking at German per capita GDP by state, yeah, so we see basically German states by gross regional production. Okay, so let me just go ahead and note here. And again, this is still the case. I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall was what, over 30 years ago. And so even today, when we're looking at these German states by their gross regional product, you're seeing that East Germany is noticeably poorer. Okay, now again, you've got Berlin, which is going to be a bit better off there, but again, like this is East Germany versus West Germany. The economic miracle occurred here, the Wunderschaft, whatever that was, right? But then you've got East Germany, where that economic miracle did not occur in the 1950s, and they are still, having a hard time, catching up to their counterparts in West Germany. And so the list of German states, yeah, this is per capita, okay, and these colors are a little bit more contrasting and that sort of thing. But there is the per capita GDP where you've got these areas. Now that's Bavaria, where you've got like BMW, Bavarian Motor Works. So you've got, this is the most prosperous area. Then you've got, the middling areas here, but then you've got, again, in East Germany, still catching up, still not quite there. So ladies and gentlemen, I am about to, and again, I'm going to be, broadcasting for another hour, but I'm going to be heading over to Marco Learning's channel. Okay. So go ahead. Those of you in the YouTube chat, you can see there is a pinned chat. Okay, so continuing at 9 p.m. on Marco Learning's channel. Okay, and that is here. And with that, stop it. All right. So with that, we've got and let me make sure that I'm putting that in the Crowdcast chat as well. Okay, so live with Marco Learning. Shout out Alston Bob Rao and his child Gustavus Adolphus, an AP Euro class in Hartford County, Connecticut. Please, he loves you. I may get a good grade. All right. Did he really name his child Gustavus Adolphus? That is so cool. That kid will probably like get made fun of and stuff, but I mean, if I meet the kid, I'll be like, oh, that is so cool. Live with Marco Learning at 9 p.m. Eastern. Okay, so that is happening. And let me see if I can, I don't think I can pin here. But ladies and gentlemen, go ahead and go to that, either to Marco Learning's channel, youtube.com/Marco Learning, and, go ahead and get onto the stream. Let's see, we were at 34,600. Let's see if we got that up to 30. Okay, we got it up to 34,700. So this is going to start in just a few minutes. Okay, it's going to start in just a few minutes. And y'all remember, Romulus Euro is available on the App Store. And those of you on YouTube as well, remember that, the AP Euro Spring Symposium, which is available on my Crowdcast. And if you're on YouTube, there's a link there. If you put in the coupon code Classroom10, you can get like 5-6 hours of me going over every section of the exam, multiple choice, SAQ, LEQ, DDQ, going through it for just $10, hours of me answering those questions. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go ahead and close out this stream. Edward, I love you too. Tom Richey loves you too. So with that, so 4 questions in 50 minutes. But Taryn, what I want to note here is when you're talking about evidence, like, when you're writing evidence on a free response question, you want to go in depth. Okay, what's going to help you is to go in depth. All right, we got some, we're doing a Goot check here. Mr. Goot's kids from Virginia Beach are here. Jessica Cozy, she has, yes, Jessica Cozy, shout out. Okay, going to get that going. Okay, Jessica Cozy, yes, Mr. Goot in Virginia Beach, Kellum High School, and also, you know, those of you at Bayside, Miss Davis's kids, wherever they are, the whole Virginia Beach community. Thank you so much, Miss Cozy. Your kids appreciate all you do. Mrs. Palmer, okay, and yeah, Mrs. Palmer, if she, oh, Amy Delbert, yes, Amy Delbert, who once sent me a king cake. I tell you what, that was great. Rodriguez and his AP Euro class. Now, remember, y'all can also follow me at Tom Richey on Instagram. Might do some shout outs here and there. So just, you know, just remember that that's going to be there as well. So going from there, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and go off this stream, but I'm going to be joining Marco Learning in just a couple of things here. Scott Dempsey is a great teacher. Miss Faison and her AP Euro class in California. All right, Amira, great to great to hear from you. And again, Amy Delbert in New Orleans. Yeah, y'all are some lucky kids. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm heading over to Marco Learning, and I'll see y'all in a bit. Always a pleasure.